Terra and I are going to go live at Crimecon,
Yes, come see us at Crimecon.
and I'm going to go set this up so we can record this for you guys, and we'll see what happens. It may or may not be like a great recording, I don't know, but this is the stage, and yeah, and this is our audience. Hi, how are you? And we're going to set it up here next to our little timer. This is our little audience, and yeah, so we're going to set that up right here. Hopefully, there we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session is about to start. Please take your seats.
From the Survivor Squad podcast, please welcome Terra, Newell, and Collier, Landry.
Ladies and gentlemen.
It's a long walk.
Yes.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. I hope everyone's getting their steps in here.
We'll let everyone get settled here. Hi, welcome. Find a seat.
Yeah, welcome.
Terra and I were talking about like what we were really going to talk about this morning. And I said, you know what, we should start out to put things in perspective for you guys by asking all of you to participate and ask you guys a question. You guys down? Yeah. Fabulous, because you don't really have much of a choice. How many people here in this room have had to make a really tough decision and take the life of another human being?
See, one.
How many people in this room have solved a murder? One.
Yes.
All right, one. We got it. 1 in 1.
Well, this is most days the worst day of someone's life is our story. And, you know, I'm Terra Newell.
And I'm Collier Landry, and this is the Survivor Squad podcast. So, I know a lot of people are very familiar with Terra's story because of Dirty John, probably not so much mine, but I do think it is important for us to hear from Terra and refresh everyone because it's been a long time, it's been a few years since she's been on the stage here at Crimecon. So Terra, and then we're gonna also get into like how all this came about, but Terra, why don't you tell us how people know you here?
So I am the survivor of Dirty John Meehan. I took him down in self-defense. I zombie slayed him. And, if you guys don't know the story, my mom met a psychopath, not knowing he was a psychopath. She got into a really quick relationship with him, which is one of the red flags of fast-moving relationships. Be aware when it's fast-moving. That is a major red flag. And, some people sometimes just move fast, but you gotta watch out for that. And so she met him. They actually got married, but I didn't know, and that was actually a couple weeks after I had a discrepancy with him or whatever.
A disagreement?
Yes, a disagreement. And I only met him twice before my attack. And the last time I saw him before the attack was the day before Thanksgiving. And he came up behind my mom because I confronted my mom. Why is he using your car? Why is he doing this? He seems like he lives here. And, you know, this is weird. He came up behind my mom, started yelling at me, saying, you know, you want your mom's money, you want your mom for yourself. And I said, no, John, that's what you want. And that's exactly what he wanted. And so he chose to isolate me, and I didn't have a relationship with my mom actually for a couple weeks. I was financially dependent on her, and I had to find a way to sell all my stuff, get rent paid, make money, you know, and I'm so fortunate to have that, but it was really hard. And this guy came into our lives and shook our whole world. And then my mom was with him so they got together in September of 2014. Then November, like late November is when they got married. And then, or like late November, early December. And then it just turned into...
It snowballed.
Yeah, it snowballed. And then, you know, it came to my attack. She left him twice. We hired private investigators and stuff to look into him. And this guy was just so good at the game. I even met someone here that said that their friend dated him in 2009. And this guy got around. And he took advantage of so many women.
And he was utilizing what you speak a lot about on your platform as an individual, but also in Survivor Squad, about coercive control.
Yes. You know, and using the 7 stages of trauma bonding where they first love bomb, and then, you know, it ends up into this addiction state. And then when you're in a toxic relationship, your brain is addicted to it like cocaine. And so you can't leave that relationship. It's not that easy to leave that relationship. So I'm happy my mom actually left him twice, because it's really hard for someone to leave someone like that, even if they are terrible human beings. So, you know, my mom left him the second time. He drove his car into the gates and left his car there. And then my mom got his car. Then he would let the dog out because he would come to California and stalk us. And then eventually it led to my attack, where he found me in the parking garage of my apartment complex. He grabbed me by the waist, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Do you remember me?" I didn't respond to that. I just tried to run away. I was unable to run away. And then that led me to be stabbed. And the knife was in a Del Taco bag, so I didn't know I was being stabbed at first. I thought I was being punched. And then I ended up falling on the ground, hitting my shoulder, and then my dog also was with me in my attack.
Cash.
Yes, he bit his ankles, and then I was able to actually kick the knife out of his hand. It landed on my right-hand side. I'm right-handed, and I picked it up, and I just started stabbing him back. And, you know, it's not easy to take a life. I still live with it every day, essentially. It's been over 7 years now. And, you know, the trauma still lives in your body, and you have to work through it. And now I'm doing my healing journey and interviewing other survivors with Collier, Landry, and this is my journey now, is, you know, another part of the healing journey too.
And we'll get into that a little more, but thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Obviously, Terra's story is very harrowing, and even as a man, I can relate to the terror that she experienced. You know, I think anybody that deals with violence firsthand. You know, one of the things is often when we talk about your story, just personally, together, one of the things that sort of is a detail that gets left out, but I think is so key, is you know, you, Terra, have faced a lot of backlash because of this, personally. And I think one of the things that a lot of people didn't understand is when police arrived on the scene, they searched John's car, the trunk of his car, and they found rope, something like 35 different knives. They found a blindfold. They found all, like, this guy was coming for her. And as someone who has also lived through surviving a psychopath, and that really spoke to me, because I said, I think the first thing when I interviewed you on my podcast, Moving Past Trauma, was this guy wasn't stopping at you. You were the first to, like, you would have been the first domino, then it would have been your other sister, then it would have been your mother, you know what I mean? Because my story starts with that scenario. My name is Collier Landry. When I was 11 years old, I awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of 2 loud thuds. I then counted 12 footsteps as they walked down the hall, and I could hear my father's voice muttering. This was New Year's Eve, 1989, and the feet stopped in the doorway of my bedroom. And as I'm sleeping, or pretending to sleep, I'm lying in my bed, and everything inside of me is telling me, don't look up. And I know for a fact that if that had been the case, I wouldn't be sitting here today. The next morning, when I managed to go back to sleep, the feet had obviously left the doorway. I went downstairs and I confronted, I ran straight to my mother's bedroom, and I started rummaging through her sheets because the bed was left in a sort of state of disarray. And I was looking for blood stains. I was trying to figure out, but the first thing was my mother didn't make her bed. My mother always made her bed. I always still to this day make my bed first thing when I get up. So that was odd to me. And I went downstairs, and my father was seated on our couch, and he had a towel wrapped around his waist. He had just got out of the shower. I said to him, "Where is my mother?" He was watching CNN at the time, and he didn't respond. And I said, "Where is my mother?" And he turned to me with this sort of glossy look in his eyes, and he says, "Well, Collier, Mommy took a little vacation." And I knew at that point that it was game on. And that he may not have killed my mother at that moment, but he has done something to her. He then launches into this whole diatribe on how, because I confront him and I say, I heard these sounds, I heard these 2 loud thuds. He tells me this whole story on how my mother threw her purse at him and was screaming at him. They were in a fight about his girlfriend because my father had a mistress. He had many mistresses over the years. He was a serious womanizer. And he then said that she threw her purse and her credit cards at him, stormed out of the house, and walked down the driveway to get into a car that was waiting. Now, I grew up in a small town in Ohio. This is the dead of winter. And let's be honest, what woman is going to throw her purse and credit cards at a man and leave?
And not a Louis Vuitton.
Not a Louis Vuitton. So I, of course, didn't believe him. And then it just continued into, we're not going to call the police. We're not going to call the FBI. And I knew when he said the FBI, and this is long before CSI is on television, but I thought to myself, that's an interesting way to escalate things. Like, why are we calling the FBI? Well, my father left that day, and true to my father's word, I did not call the police, and I wanted to be an obedient son. What I did do is I did grab the cordless phone that my mother had purchased. I ran upstairs to my bedroom where I had hidden, months previous, a list of all my mom's friends' phone numbers. and I hid it into a stuffed Garfield that I had. And I locked myself in the bathroom because at the time, my grandmother, who was my father's mother, was visiting us. And she was oddly very close with my mother. I hid in the bathroom and I started calling everyone on the list. And I said, look, I can't call the police, but you can. Later that day, 2 uniformed officers show up at our house and they are asking questions that my grandmother will not let me answer. And I'm trying to like pull one of them aside and say, this is what happened, this is what happened. And they just kind of looked at it as like this crazy little kid and, you know, this angry old Italian lady that wants him out of the house. So nothing happened. And the next day, my father came home later that night. The next day, my father leaves again, and I call my mother's friends. I say, what happened? And they said, well, we filed a missing persons report, or they're gonna do something. I'm like, okay, something has happened to her. Now, you talk about divine intervention in life, and because this is a sleepy small town in Ohio, it's New Year's Eve, the missing persons report went across the desk of a detective named Lieutenant David Messmore, who actually turned 80 years old on Friday. And he looked at me and said, doctor's wife goes missing on New Year's Eve. This is interesting. And he came to the house, and my grandmother's apoplectic. Like, I'm calling my son, he's gonna sue you. She runs to get said cordless phone. And I knew at that moment I had one chance. And I pull him aside, and while she's out of the room, and I said, my mother would never leave me. Something has happened to her. Give me your card. I go to school tomorrow, and I'll call you. Which I did. And on that day, this was January 2nd, 1990, I proceeded over the course of hours to completely, for lack of a better word, download all of my family's entire history to David Messmore, including my father's proclivity for violence, how he was abusive to both my mother and father, how I had met his girlfriend, and how they were getting a divorce, and his overall demeanor towards us. And what had happened that night, of course. And over those next 25 days, I gathered evidence with Dave Messmore, which ultimately led to finding a photograph of a house that I had never seen before, and a second photograph of my father's mistress sitting in front of a fireplace wrapped in plastic. And I said, this is a house I've never seen before, and she's attached to it. And it was about 2 weeks after that when I was yanked out of my house due to a search warrant. Another search warrant was executed in our neighboring state of Pennsylvania, and they found my mother's body buried underneath that house in the basement. And you know, as Terra and I talk about, there's a lot of, you know, cognitive dissonance comes into play a lot when you're in these scenarios, because you are, you know, obviously I remember them telling me, you know, Lieutenant Messmore found your mother, and of course you're hoping that he said, oh, she was shopping in Toronto, it was fabulous, and now she's back. But it was no, she was dead. And it's very hard to articulate what goes through your mind, because cascading down is this overwhelming sense of relief that you weren't crazy, that you weren't gaslighting yourself to believe something else had happened. And on the flip side, this overwhelming sense of sadness that what you knew in your heart was true was actually true. And I ended up being remanded to the care of the foster care system because I was abandoned by both sides of my family. Mother's side of the family said, we don't want anything to do with you because you look like your father. The father's side of the family said, we don't want anything to do with you until you tell the police that you were lying about the disappearance and your father gets out of jail. I said, that's not happening. So I was remanded to the foster care system, along with my adopted sister, who was adopted from Taiwan about 6 months before my mother's murder. And in that 6-month period of living between being pulled from my house and my father's trial, I had to sort of figure out what I was going to do about testifying against my father, because I was angry and I knew what I heard, but I was also completely isolated and ostracized from my family, and I somehow mustered up whatever it is, the courage or chutzpah, but I testified at trial for 2 days against my father, and he is still incarcerated to this day. So that journey is sort of what took me to Hollywood in Los Angeles, because I always wanted to do something with my story. And I ended up making a film many years later. I work in the entertainment business, I work in the film business. I made a film with two-time Oscar winner Barbara Koppel called A Murder in Mansfield. And through that entire experience, and also our case was publicized, it's a very popular episode of Forensic Files, season 5, episode 13, called Foundation of Lies. And I was a kid, on the witness stand, so it was kind of an anomaly, right? Testifying against his father. But I had this sort of feeling that, or understanding that, like, oh, okay, survivors are able to, like, tell their story in their own way, with their own narrative. They have a complete part in all of this, and that's what happens. And in 2022, I started a podcast, and Terra was like my first big guest. And I realized that that's not always the case. That the machine, the Hollywood machine, or what do you want to call it? There's a very insatiable appetite for true crime, as we sit at a true crime convention. But I started talking to Terra, and she's telling me, well, what did you tell me about the Dirty John podcast?
So I told him how it has over 100 million listens now. I think it has even more now, because I think I checked probably a year ago. And it's still charting on true crime. And, I don't get any residuals from that. I don't get any money. I got a lump sum from the show, and that was the only thing.
But what you were telling me was, initially when you gave those interviews to Christopher Gothard, was that you were doing it just to spread awareness.
Yeah.
And they took those interviews and they made it into the podcast.
Yes, we actually didn't know it was going to become a podcast until a couple weeks beforehand. And then we were thinking, like, oh, a podcast is like a church sermon. It's like going to go out to like a few people, and didn't realize how it got blown up. And it's really interesting because they produced everything, they did the narrative, and yes, I was included, and I am thankful for that platform still, but I wish I could tell my story my own way with my voice. And so when I met Collier and heard that he did his own documentary, I was blown away, and I was like, who is he? I started Googling him when I was on the podcast and like multitasking. And then he also interviewed my mom, and then he interviewed us together. And when he was interviewing my mom, first of all, my mom asked if he was single.
She said, are you married? And I was like, why did she ask me that? And I didn't even pay any mind to it. But later, my producer pointed out, she goes, you didn't realize she asked if you were married, right? And I was like, yeah, what did she mean? She's trying to play matchmaker. Yeah, I was really taken aback, because I had friends that worked on the show Dirty John. And, and I thought, oh, okay. And then the actual television show. And let's be clear, like, we're not here to be like, oh, we're not here to chastise your favorite true crime podcast, not at all. But we feel that with our podcast, one of the tentpoles of that was going to be like, hey, just because you see something on television, just because, survivors are on Dateline or 2020 or are out there talking about their story on podcasts, they're not making money. Those enterprises are making a lot of money off of that. And as someone who has been an entertainment veteran, obviously made many films over my career as a cinematographer and director, I always, every step of the way in Hollywood, like, if I came to everyone and I said, I have this great idea. I want to make a movie about these kids that want to be wizards, and they go to a boarding school and they learn magic and they're really good. I'm going to make a movie about that. isn't that a book? Yeah, but no, somebody told that story, but we don't need to do anything. We don't need to pay her. She's okay. That doesn't exist. However, in the true crime and the daisy chain, everyone, when you're like, for example, you're watching Dahmer on Netflix, everyone as a part of that production has been paid, except for the people who are the victims. And even on our podcast, we interviewed Rita Isbell, whose brother, Errol Lindsay, was murdered by Jeffrey Dahmer. And an actor portrays her in the show because she, in real life, wanted to take Jeffrey Dahmer's head off in her victim impact statement, and it became part of this show. And as we started delving down this rabbit hole to developing this podcast, we realized that there are so many people who have had their stories exploited. And so many people who, a lot of assumptions are made about survivors and what they go through. And we're like, we have to do this story, and we have to tell these stories, but we have to allow people to tell these stories. Not like, oh, here, we're gonna talk about them. Let's let them do it in their own words.
Yeah, and you know, when we met with Rita Isbell, we actually were connected with her through Vice because we did a documentary with Vice about the consumption of true crime. And it was really interesting because I've been doing TikTok speaking about, you know, I saw her article come out saying, please don't watch the Jeffrey Dahmer series. And so I was like, you know what, I need to support victims, I need to support survivors. And I did TikToks begging people not to watch it. And it's weird when you're like speaking out for other victims and even for yourself, you get so much backlash and you get so much support too, but TikTok is an interesting place where if you go viral, you get more backlash than you do positive, if that makes sense. And so I wanted to fight for her, and I hate speaking for someone that I don't know and not like having their permission. So I made it a goal to try to find her, and it just so happened everything aligned where we were able to get that contact because she wasn't on TikTok or Instagram or anything actually until I told her to get on TikTok. And you know, it's like, it's so important to have that voice and to speak up and have other survivors support you in that sense.
Yeah, and it's you know, and that's just, you know, one case. But yes, we were very fortunate enough to have Vice bring us along on this ethical true crime documentary and be able to share voices and bring other survivors to the table, which was really, really cool.
And Kim Goldman is in that.
Yeah. I'm getting into that. Yeah, so, you know, along the way of allowing survivors to tell their stories, right? Terra, you mentioned Kim Goldman, who we brought on the show. Now, for those of you that don't know, who is Kim Goldman?
So Kim Goldman, her brother Ron Goldman was murdered by O.J. Simpson. You know, some people.
Did you almost say unalived?
Yes, YouTube.
We're so used to like doing things on YouTube, and there's YouTube right there. It's like you gotta say unalived. We don't do that because we're trying to be. We're trying to tiptoe around algorithms. So if you guys ever see that, that's why we do that.
Yeah, but you know, Kim, it's really interesting because, you know, when OJ's book was coming out, they had a problem with it. And the only way for them to get support in that sense was to fight to take that book down. And then it ended up where they got ownership of the book. And then they actually got backlash for that because they're like, oh, well, like you're helping support him get out his story and stuff, and you know, you're making money off of it. And they've actually not made as much money as you think. They probably made like $60-something or something like that.
Well, you know, one of the things that Kim had expressed to us in the interview, which is something that I was aware of because OJ publicly said it. I don't think he's paid his lawyers at this point. But he said, I'm not going to pay this lawsuit because they had won a civil lawsuit. I believe it was either $70 or $90 million, wrongful death suit shortly after the trial ended. And one of the things that Kim shares with us is the amount of vitriol and hate mail that she gets from people saying horrific things to her, saying, you know, you rich bitch, what do you have to complain about? You have $90 million, et cetera, et cetera. It goes back to, you know, and I hate to use coarse language, Kim's a wonderful human, so you guys understand that, like, people using vulgarities to try to, you know, excoriate her is absolutely horrific, especially someone who's lost someone they love so much. But it shows and it speaks to the sort of climate of the keyboard cowboys and the gallery of some people that consume this in a way that, you know, they just make these assumptions that people have just made all this money off their stories, and it's just not true. And they use that to weaponize, you know, and that was, again, the thing that brought me around with Terra. Like, I thought, oh, Dirty John's wildly successful. I'm sure she got, you know, Brinks truck backing up in her driveway, and it just wasn't the case. And meanwhile, the side effect of all of that was her mother losing her business and about $3 million a year worth of business, right?
Oh yeah, when the story came out, contractors actually stopped doing contracts with them. They lost $3 million during that time, not to mention all the money that he took from my mom. It was insane because, you know, you victim blame the person, and she almost lost her daughter, you know, and I almost lost my life. And John was just that good at his game, and these psychopaths are just that good at their game. And we want to victim blame and be like, why didn't she leave? But, you know, it's so hard to leave that relationship. And that's why, you know, it's important for us to talk to survivors too, because
Exactly.
we understand to a certain extent of what they went through. You know, everybody's story is different and unique to each person, but we're all like a, you know, Collier says the saying, like, we're all part of a
Squad that no one really wants to be a part of, but we're all a part of the Survivor Squad. But we usually say that at the end, and we got another half hour. No, but in all seriousness, the thing is that one of the very unique things in these situations is it is very hard, and I think, this is where I really struggle with true crime, because my foray into all of this was I made a movie, you know, Variety calls it, you know, it comes dressed as true crime, but it's really a plea for humanity because, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the film, I confront my father in prison for the murder. I had a relationship with my father for almost 3 decades, you know, leading up to that. And I came from this sort of place of, well, everybody thinks the bad guy's the bad guy. Like, right? Are we clear about that? That the victims are the heroes, that the survivors are the heroes, and that the bad guys are the bad guys. And then I got into this world of true crime, which was literally at this convention last April or May in Vegas, and I started seeing a whole different side of this, like, wow, people do glorify these perpetrators. And I really kind of struggle with that. And I often ask people, why are people so into true crime? And why do they almost lift up the perpetrator or you know, these perpetrators all have a messianic syndrome to begin with, but then to like exalt them is wild to me. And then I realized something that was really key. It is very easy for people to sort of bifurcate themselves from a psychopath, right? Be like, okay, well, I would never be that person. I would never kill my wife. I would never try to kill my wife's daughter. I would never do these horrible things. I would never, you know, go after children. You know, we can all probably agree that that's not a good way to behave.
yeah.
But also at the same time, you go onto this right-hand fork of the road and you go, well, that could never happen to me. She must have been too stupid. She must see all the signs. It's obvious that she could have done this. You know, a lot of people say to me, oh, your mother didn't leave the relationship because she wanted money from your father. You know, she was addicted to being a doctor's wife. And I'm like, well, you do understand my mother put my father through medical school. My mother graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, which is an Ivy League school. And, you know, and she was quite capable. She was the one that was running the books. But and Terra speaks excellently to this, as does her mother, that when these people get their hooks in you, you can't leave. And you know, a woman with a child with a violent husband, and you know, you're trying to make a plan, right? So a lot of people try to say, "Oh, that wouldn't happen to me." The purpose of the Survivor Squad is to allow you as an audience that may or may not feel that way to walk in the survivor's shoes and hear it in their own words.
Yeah. And we also hope that when we put out these episodes that, you know, even though these people may have extreme traumas, you're able to relate to their trauma in some way, because we all have trauma, you know, even if you don't realize it. It's like, okay, like, my parents didn't do something right as a kid, because, you know, parents can't be 100% perfect. So they're bound to give you some sort of trauma, right? But it's really interesting how we navigate it, and how people contact us and will say, like, thank you so much for, you know, putting out Amanda Knox's story, because before we heard your episode, we didn't believe her. And, you know, it kind of hurts me to, like, hear that the survivor's not believed, but I'm so thankful when I get those messages, because, I mean, there was another podcast that had her on, and I saw the reviews from that, and I was just like, this poor girl was in Italy just trying to live her life. You know, her roommate gets murdered, and then they actually have the killer too, Rudy Gaudet, and she still wound up in jail because, you know, the police didn't treat her nice there. They had her sign something saying she actually did do it, but she didn't understand Italian. So when you're in another country and someone's saying, hey, sign this, you're gonna get out, you're gonna be fine, and she signs it, and then she's in jail and has to fight her way to get out of jail, and there's already 3 people in for that murder. And, you know, one of the evidence that they had against her was that her DNA was on stuff. Well, her DNA is everywhere in that apartment because she lives there. You know, it would be different if there was blood DNA, you know, but just looking at all the evidence, it's like, how can a little girl do that to a roommate? And, you know, in my situation, like, there was the adrenaline and everything, but there was no confrontation between the girls. There was nothing like that. And so it's just like, it's a witch hunt.
21st century witch hunt.
Yeah.
And you know, there's like I can't edit that out. There are 3 episodes in this, you know, I don't know if you call it season, but we started the podcast in May. It's thank you all of you that listen, by the way, because you know, we started charting on Apple, and we want to chart again, so please download support. But there were 3 individual interviews that we kind of want to go through, which obviously the first would be Amanda Knox. And it's interesting when you're talking to someone who is very polarizing, and not because she's polarizing, she's very sweet and nice and kind, and she's wickedly intelligent. But there were so many people that were very emboldened and impassioned that they know what happened. It's amazing to me, and I sit up here and I say this as someone who lives through this himself, where I have people tell me what happened in the murder of my mother. I was manipulated by the police, and I said, you understand that I'm the one that made sure the police were called and told them what I heard, right? Like, that was like, I was the one who initiated that, not them coming to me and saying, what do you know, young man? But people are very opinionated about what happens. People are definitively, I didn't know how many people were in the garage when you were attacked by John Meehan, but apparently there were thousands of people there to see what happened because they all have opinions on it. And we just, like, that's one of the things that's very unique and something that we as survivors of this, and I hate that word. She knows I hate that word, survivor, but I don't know what
survivors.
else. I don't know what I hate. Like, oh, we're survivors, but you know, but I get
hate
it.
the word victim.
Yeah, I really hate the word victim, but I think that that the perspective of being able to ask questions that no one else, and a standard interviewer can't say, to someone who's been through unspeakable trauma, like, how do you feel about your attacker? How do you feel about this person that did this to your brother, mother, etc., father, right? But Terra can talk about that. I can talk about that. We can engage in that conversation. And there is a lot of talk about, how to approach survivors and how to initiate these conversations, because there's so much to be learned. I know that people, again, like, they look at the bad guy and they go, okay, well, we can learn, like, lock our doors at night, right? Carry a stun gun or whatever it is, right? But the flip side is, what can we learn and see the sign? Like, what were the signs for that person? So we don't end up on a true crime podcast. And, there was another survivor that we interviewed. Her name is Sarah Klein.
Yes, and I actually didn't know who her attacker or her perpetrator was when I met her. I was just like, oh, you live in Newport Beach. You live here. I want to connect with you. You're a lawyer. That's great. And then, so we're like, oh, let's connect, let's, do a podcast or whatever. And then I found out after Larry Nassar was stabbed in jail, I was like, oh, Sarah Klein is one of his survivors.
One of his first victims, too.
Yes.
And in that episode, she goes in to explain, like, how she met Larry Nassar before he was even a doctor. He was like a 22-year-old guy who walked into her gymnasium where she was training gymnastics. And he was in her life for 20-some years.
Yeah, and she would get lunches with him after everything,
She went to his wedding.
Yes, and it's so interesting the attachment that you may have to that perpetrator, because trauma is so all over the place in a sense. And I went through something interesting where I'm kind of like a narcissist dream. I'm very agreeable, I'm easygoing, and I asked her this question because I was actually victimized by someone in the true crime industry, and I was friends with him for a while. And
he is not at this show, thank God.
Yes, and he's not invited here anymore. But
it's Billy Jensen, let's just get it real.
Yeah.
Billy Jensen, you're not welcome here.
yes, but I wanted to ask her, did you feel that like emotional tie of feeling sorry for him? Because Billy would tell me all the time, like, oh, I'm gonna kill myself, and I would be like, I don't want to call this guy out. He wants to kill himself, and that's also a manipulation tactic, guys. But Sarah Klein, she was attached to her abuser, and she even feels bad when he got stabbed in jail because it's so all over the place. Trauma is just all over the place, and you have to realize that, like, not every victim or survivor is going to just hate that perpetrator.
Yeah.
It's such a, and you can speak to this.
It's a very complex situation. And when we were talking to Sarah, and I said, I understand. I love my father. I can remember, I did an interview with the New York Times, and they saw my film, and they said, what tells me something about you, Collier? I learned everything I need to know about you in 3 seconds in the film. I said, what is that? He said, after this entire confrontation with your father, trying to get him to tell you the truth about the murder, you get up, you hug him, and you say, I love you, Pop. And I was like, oh, I forgot about that. He goes, yeah, but that's what, and I said, but I do love my father. I don't like the person that he is, but I do love my father. I worry about my father all the time. He turned 80 years old this year. How is he doing? And honestly, like, that man is my genetic petri dish. Live long and prosper in prison, because that way I know I got a shot to make it to at least 70. I'll be good, right? And, but all kidding aside, like, I do have that connection with him. I do worry about him. And Sarah was like, she genuinely, her first instinct was, I hope he's okay. Because at at the fundamental core where these perpetrators may behave like monsters. The people who are victimized, the people around those victims and survivors, they're all human beings. And I think that's the most important takeaway from our show, is that you're listening to a real human being having a real, genuine human experience.
Yeah, and I just have to say a shout out to Jane. She is featured on Dark Valley and she has Invisible Tears.
Jane Borowski.
Yes. And she's incredible, and you know, there's ways that we can relate to our attacks. You know, my attack, I'm very thankful to have just a couple stab wounds and not in fatal places. And but Jane is a hero, she's a survivor, she's a badass, and you know, I'm so thankful to connect with her even, and just so grateful for honestly all of you guys. Because without you guys, we wouldn't have a platform, we wouldn't be able to share survivors' voices, and you know, you are what makes us grow. You're what amplifies us. And whenever I meet people here that say they listen to the podcast, and Collier feels the same.
Yeah, they're like, hi, I just started watching you on YouTube, Collier, and I'm like, I don't know you, but this is wild. But it's very cool. It's very cool. It's very cool in a sense that like, oh, you're listening to my message. Like, I don't care about like, we're not here for the clicks and the likes and the stuff, other than it builds our message. I mean, we want all the clicks and the likes, don't get me wrong. Everyone in this room, follow us, like, subscribe, do all of that.
Share, tell all of your friends.
But it means that the message is getting out. And there has been a long line of podcasts, television shows, etc. Again, glorifying perpetrators. And not even intentionally, right? It's not like these people, it's not like Ryan Murphy's a bad guy and is out to like victimize people. It's not like shows that talk about these situations, they're not out to do harm. Like, we're not saying that at all. But what we are saying is that it then snowballs into this effect where the survivors, the victims, they often get lost. And I think we are trying to be at the forefront, and obviously, you know, our good friend Sarah Turney with Voices for Justice, fabulous podcast. You know, we're all trying to do things where it's more survivor-forward content and allowing people, because I'll tell you something. When I was 12 years old, literally in the nadir of my life, and thinking, how am I gonna get through this? If I could have turned on a podcast or watched a YouTube video of somebody that's saying, hey guys, I was 12 years old, I was in foster care, no one was there for me, I was being abused, etc. I was abandoned by my family, but I found the courage to face the monster. And here I am today, sitting on the stage at Crimecon saying, you can face that monster too. That would have been so valuable to me. And that's what makes doing this and sacrificing to do this so powerful and so important, is that people can look and go, God, that guy, like Terra, look at Terra. Like, by the way, John was 6'2", 6'3". I'm 6'2", you know, 215 pounds. He was bigger than I am. And look at Terra. And so to think that she somehow has some, you know, was somehow the aggressor is utterly fanciful, right? But look at the tremendous amount of courage that came from someone who said, not today, buddy. Not gonna happen today. Not on my watch.
And I just have to add, if you're ever in that type of situation, your femur muscle is your largest muscle, or your largest bone in your body, and so use your legs, you know, use everything you can to fight back, because I hope that if any of you guys are in that situation, I hope that you guys live too.
Well, we didn't know we were gonna get emotional, but here we are. Yeah, I think having a platform where we can lift up these voices to show that there are, like, that it's gonna be okay for everyone. And as we also say on the show, like ad nauseum, like we are the extreme examples of this type of trauma. Like this is, it doesn't get worse than your dad murdering your mother and you being at the center of it. It doesn't get worse than somebody, a psychopath attacking you and trying to kill you who was stalking your family. It doesn't get much worse. That does not invalidate or say, oh, well, your trauma's less, or you were in an abusive relationship, so you had it much better because this didn't happen. That's not what we're saying at all. We acknowledge it, like everyone processes trauma different. And let's be honest, trauma in this world affects all of us. That was one of the reasons why I made A Murder in Mansfield, was because I wanted to show the ramifications, the impacts of violence, the consequences on communities, on ancillary victims, showing what non-combat PTSD looks like for people. To have that vulnerability, right? We all go through that. And the more that we can understand that collectively, I mean, everyone in this room has been through a collective trauma. We were all trapped inside our homes for a year of our lives, right? So we can all look at that and go, there's something to learn about who we are as people and our own resilience, right? About that we can make it through.
Yeah, you know, and we really can make it through anything. We are resilient people. We, you know, our bodies, if you look at trauma in a certain way of it's a positive effect and that you are stronger in it, your body actually doesn't carry those cells the same way. Where if you're like, oh, my trauma is a burden, I'm never gonna move past it, then that's the kind of thing that actually creates cancer and sicknesses. But if you're like, my trauma is like my superpower,
Badge of honor.
yeah, you know, then you can live a long life. You can, you know, live a healthy life too.
And maybe since we all have, I mentioned that collective trauma, maybe perhaps Terra, I'm wrong. Maybe we are all a part of a squad that no, we all really didn't want to be a part of. Well, we are all a part of the Survivor Squad. We have 10 minutes left, and I felt that was a pretty good way to hey.
Yeah.
But we want to open up for questions because I see that there's a microphone. Can we do that? Is that what that's there for, or is that to look pretty?
Nice.
So first I'm going to say, stop reading comments on TikTok. There's nothing good to be gained from that. Just stop it.
Thank you.
Second, I work as a therapist, often with people who are just starting their journey of dealing with trauma, and I wonder what kind of advice you would give to somebody who is just starting down that route to get to that point of strength where you're at now.
So I see it's really important to confide in a safe person first if you're not ready to share your trauma. I also do trauma coaching. That's why I probably took this first. And I also think that a lot of us are actually not breathing correctly, and it's really important to breathe correctly. You know, breathing out of our nose and doing long, slow breaths actually really helps you, and that actually helps you stay healthier. I'm really into Wim Hof, and I love the book. I just finished the book Breath by James Nestor. And so just breathe, do deep belly breathing, try not to breathe out of your chest as much. You know, pay attention to your body too. Like, how are you carrying your trauma in your body? So those are something I would say.
Absolutely what Terra says. I'll also plug, she's big into yoga, so I would say yoga. Yoga works for her. I'm not a yoga person, yet. But I think, you know, I think acceptance is a good first step, and more importantly than that, accepting the fact that it's not your fault. That if you were in an abusive situation, or if someone life was taken, you know, you were doing the best you could. You know, it's not your fault that someone was evil enough to do what they did to you. And I think that happens a lot with survivors of child sexual assault, and I'm pretty sure, just based on the statistics, there are probably lots of people in this room that have experienced that in one form or another, unfortunately, which is always the hardest thing for me when talking to people, is knowing that. My father, I confronted him, he had molested my 2 cousins, and was actually going to go to jail for that a year before he murdered my mother, but they had to drop the charges. So, and I didn't even know this until years later, right? So those are the things. It's knowing that you were put in a situation where you didn't have a choice, and try to lead with kindness for yourself first.
Again, thank you for sharing your story. I'm also a therapist. And I was just wondering, at what point did you say, I do want to seek counseling, or did you meet with a mental health professional, and what prompted you to do that if you did?
So I wanted to appease to everyone at first, and I wanted everyone to be okay about my trauma. So I was like, I'm fine. And then it got to the place where actually my sister and I got into a physical altercation. I started choking her, and I went back to the place of my attack, and I told my sister I was gonna kill her. And that night the cops were called. I ended up packing up all my stuff and going to Texas and getting EMDR therapy. I also went and saw a few therapists before that, but I went to the Amen Clinic. They are amazing, but I just couldn't afford it. They are $400 a session, so I was like, I kind of can't do that anymore. And then I went to Kaiser. That therapist also told me that after I told her that I didn't want to be here, I felt like dying. I just didn't know what to do. She told me, I don't think you want to get better. And that, I never saw that therapist again. That put me down a bad hole, actually, and that's what led to my sister and myself getting in an altercation. And then I went to Texas, started EMDR therapy. I went twice a week for EMDR therapy. I did hiking every single day, and I was very fortunate to have the financial support of my parents during that time to be able to work through that trauma and get to a semi-untriggered state.
Yeah, but it is still something that you deal with. And as far as therapy, if you watch my film, the therapy sessions are right there for everyone to see. And my therapy, the therapist, Dr. Dennis Maricas, who's fabulous, he was, for lack of a better term, a first responder. He happened to be at the school the day that they found my mother's body, and my collective student body and the entire school was just devastating because my mom was loved by so many people. But I visit with him in the film, and we get into a lot of very complex issues, including anger towards my mother and seeking approval on a consistent basis from my father, and how that had a hold of me into adulthood. And as I'm trying to navigate what I wanted to do with my story, because, a lot of you might not, well, none of you know this, but my father thought I was going to make a film to help him get out of prison. So that's what happens when you deal with a psychopath and a narcissist. But my therapy sessions are out there for people to watch. If they were all out there, it would have been a multi-day film, but it's only 2 hours. But yeah, I think that, and I had a gap of about 30 years before, about 25 years between therapy, and it's now part of my life, and it's great. And I think for me, the state of catharsis the real catharsis was doing something creatively with my story, because I'm a creative person. So that was like, the ultimate for me. Like, okay, I did this. Now I can start my life. I made a movie. Now I can start my life after 35 years. This is great. So that's my 2 cents on the therapy thing. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing your stories so publicly. I've watched both programs, and they were very powerful and well done. So thank you for that. The question I do have, and I'm speaking from personal experience, pales in comparison to what you two have been through, and I know
But
you've
it's still your
mentioned-
journey, man. It's still your journey.
Still my journey. I thank you for that. The question I do have, though, is from my own experience. I know that there is kind of the victims are on one side, the perpetrators are on the other, but it's not a Disney movie. Like, sometimes there is components that are, that the person could have done differently. And my concern is that there tends to be a bit of a polarization in terms of victim perpetrator. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that. And in your cases, you're a step removed from the crimes. You're on the more extreme end of where you can say, okay, obviously that 100% not your fault. But do you have any comments on that?
Well, first of all, it is a murky water between the victim and the perpetrator. And I have yet to find that damn singing crab. He's supposed to sing, right? Under the sea, wasn't it a singing crab? You mentioned the Disney thing, I had to go for it. Yeah, it is a sort of, I feel like, and Terra, you can weigh on this, but I feel like there are two pillars, right? The perpetrator pillar never moves, right? Because they're never going to admit fault. They're never going to give you what you want or what you think you need to move forward. So that doesn't move. It's you that has to do this yo-yo effect. It's almost like elasticized. Your connection with them. It gets closer, it gets further away, it gets closer through your journey. And guess what? That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
And I think for me, it was really important to understand who John was first, to understand things. So I think it is important to understand aspects of the perpetrator and know them. And, now I'm in the place where I'm starting to talk more to other people that have been victimized by John. I mean, I talked to Tanya and his ex-wife and the daughters and everything, but, I'm starting to talk to more ex-girlfriends now. And not all of them had a bad experience. So I think it's really interesting to learn about the perpetrator and what they do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Well, Terra, the red zeros are up. Oh, Jay Borowski.
And can we go a little over?
Hi guys, I love you guys.
Oh, I love you too.
My first Crimecon, I never felt so like I fit in someplace like I have here, being surrounded by so many survivors. And yeah, I'm with Dark Valley, but I also have my own podcast, Invisible Tears. My question for you is, a lot of people have asked me, or have suggested to me throughout the years, that for me to find some kind of inner peace, I needed to forgive. And I really had a hard time with that because my case is still unsolved. I don't know who attacked me. So who the hell do I forgive? And never mind, is this guy gonna show some compassion or anything? So with me, I learned to, Oprah Winfrey, I forgive the situation that I had no control over. Were you guys able to go down that road to forgive what happened to you?
I remember it was 2010, and I was filming in the Dominican Republic, and I was working with these motorcycle stunt riders, and I was telling them my story, and I said, I forgive my father. And they looked at me and they said, how can you forgive such a monster? And I said, you guys are forgetting something. Forgiveness is not about him. It's about me. It's about Terra. It's about us. It's about you as survivors.
Yeah, and I don't think I will forgive John exactly for what he did to me, but I forgive the situation. I forgive my mom. I forgive me for whatever I had to do. I forever will have that hate for him, but I don't have that hate, if that makes sense. It's I don't like what he did, but it's what happened, and it's a shark is a shark, and these guys are sharks. So it's how do we stop this from happening to someone else? So that's just my thing. And
It's by spreading awareness.
yes, so yeah. Yeah.
And you are?
I'm Terra Newell.
And I'm Collier Landry, and we are the Survivor Squad podcast. Thank you all so much. Hold on, I'm gonna grab a little thing. Everybody, say hi to YouTube, everybody. Remember to watch, like, subscribe. Find us on Apple, Spotify, we have Patreon, all that stuff. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Yay, Terra. Look, Terra. No, she doesn't want the microphone. It's Yeah. Oh, man, what's up, man? Kenny Kinsey, what's going on, man? How are you, buddy? Look at Kenny, right there.
Great work, brother. Great
Thank you
work.
so much, man.
Hey, no more victims advocate, survivors advocate.
I like this.
I like it,
I
brother.
like this.
I like it.
Thank you so much. Hold on, let me,